G'day guys, Chris Story here. Today I'm going to take you through the 2021 best trade and free agency targets. So let's get started. So basically with all these names, I've really made it a priority to look for budget off-season rival targets basically. So some will be trade, some will be free agents, some will be delisted free agents, and potentially even in some cases past players who have been delisted. So to go through some of the names. So you've got Peter Laddams. So for me, if I need a ruckman, he's the guy I'd be targeting this off season. So obviously for Port Adelaide, he's been stuck behind Scott Lysett. And but when he's actually been playing through the ruck, I've actually found him to be very effective and particularly good around the ground. So yeah, if I'm say a Geelong, maybe a Bulldogs, this is the guy I'd go for first. But obviously depends on your budget. So Port Adelaide will be asking you to cough up because they're aware, just like most in the AFL community would be, that Laddams can play and that is effective. So yeah, he certainly won't come easy, but if you really need a very good ruckman, Laddams is that guy and he can be that guy for quite a while. So going down the list, so Sam Hayes. So he's actually someone who's yet to debut, but for those who watch the Sandful, his play's been very strong. And for me, he can actually step in and be a number one option at a few teams. So maybe that's a Bulldogs, maybe it's a Carlton. Those sorts of teams in those sorts of situations, I feel a Hayes could actually come in and be that guy. So, and again, given he hasn't debuted, you're not going to have to pay a lot. So if Port Adelaide aren't going to let Laddams go and you can't get him, I'd be targeting Sam Hayes, given he's that third option and really someone who Port Adelaide don't have a major need for necessarily, and of course someone you can utilize to a greater degree if you're in need. And also, before I go a bit further, I thought I'd also go into my philosophy regarding trading targets and free agency targets. So my view is very much along the lines of, if you've got list needs, trade period free agency is where you do it. Don't wait till the draft. You want to be able to be in a position where in the draft you really want to maximize your hand and take the best players available. So I'd put a very heavy priority on that personally. But yeah, going through the rest of the names. So Max Lynch. So only the 2 games for Collingwood, only got that small taste, but nonetheless, he was very competitive for Collingwood. And in that 2-game sample filling in for Brodie Grundy, well, Collingwood didn't really lose a lot, which is incredible to say given Grundy's a top 3 consensus ruckman in the game, really, it's fair to say. So, and Lynch actually, interestingly, won the hit-out count against Max Gawn when he faced up against Melbourne. So, didn't get overawed, only the 2 games. So, if you pump 30 games into him, you might have someone. So, again, if you're in that Bulldogs Carlton sort of situation where you really need a ruckman who can just step in right away, a Max Lynch is a solid option. And for me, I'd be personally recommending him to a Dogs as a pretty sort of simple guy to include in that Lipinski trade. So you don't really need to be flipping picks because both teams are obviously wanting to hold their picks for their respective father-sons and not forfeit their hand. Going on to the next name, so Matthew Flynn. So for GWS, obviously, you've got all those ruckmen there. So you've got Bruce coming back from injury, who the Giants obviously are hoping for the best from. You've got Briggs as well. So with those guys, and Flynn's out of contract, so I think you've potentially got another opportunity with a Flynn to get another possible young ruckman. So again, you don't want to be paying up, particularly for these last 3. You don't want to be paying a whole lot, given they're not necessarily yet high-level players, but they look like they can be potentially solid enough to adequate sort of number 1 options. So yeah, certainly if I need those genuine rucks, these are the guys that I'd be this season, off-season targeting. So looking at key defenders. So where I see a tremendous amount of value is actually with 2 delisted free agents from last year. So you've got Blake Slenslog, who was a Cat B rookie for Geelong, who they got rid of a bit too soon. But of course, with no VFL last year, it was a bit hard to sort of get to see him then, to know that he'd progressed the way he has. But tremendous year in the waffle, and just such a natural ball reader behind the play. So yeah, if I'm looking for that genuine centre half back who intercepts at a high rate and can really use the footy really well in defence, he's someone I'd be looking at. And Sam Skinner as well. So obviously former Brisbane Lion, delisted end of last year, but incredible season in the Sandful. So had a final where he had 10 contested marks, 11 intercept marks. Just staggering stuff. And since switching, into defence in that second half of this year in the Sandful. He's played absolutely terrific footy. So he's someone, as with a Slenslog, in an instant, I would pick. Even though he has had those ACLs in the past, I'd absolutely take the chance. It's a free shot. So great value, get both of them for that matter. And guys I'd target in a hurry. Robbie Tarrant looks like he's committed to Richmond. I think he'll be pretty good. In those last 7 or so games, he played well enough. He's not who he was going back a few years, but he's still adequate. So has that stopgap for absolutely nothing? He's a good get. Phil Davis, to my knowledge, yet to sign with GWS. So I'm presuming he still does. But yeah, look, given there's a bit of a hold up, given GWS don't seem fully committed, here's another where if I'm in that situation where I want that sort of immediate guy, a bit like Richmond with Robbie Tarrant, Phil Davis is perfectly fine still for me. So I think he can play probably another couple of reasonable years. So yeah, we'll have to see how that plays out. But again, if I'm looking for that veteran key defender, that someone who's pretty solid back there, I think Davis is a good get still. And then a Daniel Talia. So obviously the last couple of years he's had his injuries, but for me, look, he's still young enough. He's certainly motivated and really been pretty outward in sort of expressing that. So yeah, look, if I want that negating key defender, Talia is fine. He adds some experience, some veteran leadership. He's just that solid piece back there. So given his motivation, he feels pretty confident in his body. I'd be pretty open-minded. And if I'm looking for a younger one, Biggie Nguyen. So he's had a couple of years with Richmond, bit of an unknown to a lot of people, I'm sure. But he's a bit like that Alir type, where just such a natural reader behind the ball, really good intercept mark, very athletic. But of course, again, with the lack of a VFL season last year, shortened this year, of course, with the Victorian lockdowns, I really do think a Biggie Nguyen has scope to develop. It's just really giving him those opportunities. So still very skinny, still developing. But he's one of those guys where as a project, you give him time and I think he can come good. So yeah, he's someone where I'd offer a rookie position to him very willingly. And I'd even consider using a senior list spot on him too. So I think he's still pretty solid and someone who can possibly provide that long-term solution for a team if you've got the patience and you don't need it right away. So, and then some versatile key positioners. So Jake Riccardi firstly. So what did he do in his first 3 AFL games? Well, he kicked 8 goals. So I think he had 2, 4 and 2 goals. So really good start to his career. He's an absolute force aerially in terms of that attack on the ball. So he's got those weapons. Then first game of the VFL season this year, what did he do? He went into defence. He got 40 disposals, 19 marks. Intercepted everything. Absolutely starred back there. So I actually fancy him more as a key defender than I do key forward. But then again, GWS decide, no, we want to put you forward again. So the next week, what's he do? He kicks 8 goals in the VFL. So just, I guess that lack of opportunity has been a big factor for him. And I guess also that being switched around has probably unsettled him a bit as well, I feel like. So with Riccardi, I think if you show him confidence, he's that later improver as well. So he developed later, really came on. Sort of, I guess, he had that sort of overage year in the NAB League where he really came on that year, showed a lot of progress, showed potential, went to the VFL, took another huge step forward, and then again in season 1, showed that sort of scope at AFL level as well. So given that sort of rate of improvement, even though we haven't necessarily seen it from him this year, I really do like Riccardi still. And if you're not paying a lot for him, I'd be very happy to use a senior list spot on him because I think he could be a solution maybe at either end, but I do have a real level of intrigue with him as a key defender, as that sort of centre half back. Just let him really sort of free roam, intercept as much as possible, just because of the way he attacks it aerially and is that marking force. I really do see an intriguing vision there. And then Billy Frampton. So, yeah, look, at AFL level, he hasn't looked great when he's been a key forward, but but in the Sandful, on the other hand, he's actually dominated and played really good footy, been a contested marking force, really incredible athlete, is that 2-metre type. So he's got a lot of talent. But what I would say of Frampton is that as a key defender, that's actually where I think he can carve out a niche. So just had that tiny taste at the end of the year, of course, at AFL level down back, but he also had those few games in the Sandful. So finishing the year with, I think it was 30 disposals, 31 disposals. He had his 10 plus marks. I think it was around 13 marks in both games. So Doing that sort of stuff, look, that's AFL caliber, and he's got the attributes. So I think he just needs that extended run as a key defender at AFL level, and I think he can be a piece for a team. So again, he's one of those guys where he's had a number of years in the AFL system, but he's just been underutilized, and I think there's a real opportunity with a Frampton. So I think he'd be one of those, I guess, savvy Moneyball sort of recruiting choices there for a team that, I guess, is on a budget, but really does need that key position player, and ideally more key defender for me than key forward. And I'd say similar of Levi Casbolt. All his career he's been a forward, but just seeing glimpses of him down back, understanding how great of a contested mark he is, I'm really intrigued by him as a key defender. Of course, for, say, a Brisbane, he'd be an easy fit in terms of just plug him in for a year. He can play in the place of Hipwood, and that's going to do the job. And I think there's viability for that too. But again, if you need a key defender, Casbolt really intrigues me. And I'm fully aware of his age. He was born in 1990, so look, he's obviously on that downside, and a lot of people would rightly argue it's too late to make that switch. But look, you don't become smaller, you don't completely lose that contested marking ability. So I do still have that intrigue with the Casbolt down back. So I think at both ends you've really got that viability there. And then you've got Callow, who was picked during the mid-season draft. So is someone where if Hawthorn let him go, or if I can trade for him, even if it's just a late pick, I would happily trade for Callow. I've got a tremendous amount of confidence in him based on what I saw in the first half of the season in the Sandful. So just seeing what he was doing as that contested marking forward, he was leading the comp in contested marks. So doing that as someone who missed out on the draft last year, phenomenal stuff. He was a genuine number one option inside 50 and doing all the team stuff as well on top of that. But he's someone in defense I'm actually, again, intrigued by as well, which is why I don't just put him in the key forward basket. So strong one-on-one, has that strong contested marking. I do see scope there too. So if I can just cough up a late pick for him, I absolutely would. I think he's better than a lot of the key position players in this draft. So I think there's quite a bit of value there. And then Nathan Kruger. So a bit of a wild card. Look, I'm not as high conviction on him as I am with a number of others, but look, he does have a good athletic profile. He can take some contested marks, moves really well. Skills are actually pretty good. So, I guess it's just that lack of VFL opportunity to develop. We just have to sort of see with him. So Collingwood will no doubt take him. Bit of a risk. I wouldn't spend a lot for him, but it is someone where he could work out, so I do want to add him to this list on that basis, just because he hasn't had that exposure or that opportunity, as with a lot of those playing for those Victorian teams that would have been developing in the VFL. So, and then looking at key forwards. So Sam Reid, I still respect his game, unsigned by Sydney. You can give him a 2-year contract, and I think he goes pretty reasonably. So it is not done. But of course, with Sydney, they've got a good number of capable key forwards there. So Logan McDonald, I think they'll really want to pump games into next year. I think he'll be a star for the long term. So, if you're after that immediate key forward, Sam Reid's a good get for mine. So, and again, a Brisbane could use him. GWS could use him with the likes of Finlayson wanting out. So there's a few teams that could use a Sam Reid. Finlayson, look, I wouldn't actually target him in Port Adelaide's situation. I think they can do better. But look, if you're a team struggling for a key forward and he's not going to cost a lot, Finlayson's proven enough and able enough without necessarily being a high-level key forward. So you can have him. He's going to be adequate. So, but yeah, again, I just wouldn't pay a lot. He's not that good. General forwards, so Alex Sexton. So he's someone where I'm not really sure where Gold Coast see him. He's been sort of up and down in terms of, I guess, how he seems to be viewed internally, and he keeps getting dropped every year at stages. So he's someone where I just feel like Gold Coast are underutilizing him. I think he's a little better than they, I guess, believe him to be. So, look, just goal-kicking force. He's led their goal-kicking before. If you need that, I guess, medium forward who's pretty capable, he's one that I'd be saying, yeah, look, he's pretty good. You should target him. And Josh Caddy. So he had that 2018 season where, for me, he was the equal of Jordan De Goey. I'll talk about Josh Caddy every off-season until someone else takes him and uses him as a forward. But for me, Richmond have completely misused him. They've missed the point with Caddy. So, and I don't know how they've done that because he was great in 2018. So If you want that medium forward, Caddy's a good get. I'd get him. One-on-one isolated, he's a problem. It's just like having another De Goey up forward. So, and he won't cost a lot. He's been dropped a few times. He'll turn 30 next year, so he'll be cheap and a good get for mine. Mitch Wallace, great last year, hasn't had those opportunities this year. So, yeah, look, again, I think he's someone where he has that role-playing potential to be a reasonable piece and reasonable component. So, again, for a late pick, that's really good. You're getting someone who, again, as I'd say with a Caddy, you're getting a best 22 player. So, and someone who can play a role to a good standard. So that's fine. And then Tom Lynch. So Adelaide delisted him. I don't get it. For me, he's still a really good footballer, and North Melbourne are going to take him as a development coach. And for me, he needs to keep playing on at AFL level. His AFL caliber, he still needs to keep going. He's got another, I'd say 2 years easy for me, really. So, yeah, I just don't really know what's going on there. But yeah, for me, he's still a really good footballer and someone I still have a good deal of respect for the game of. So, and I'd even add another forward here. So I'd be going Darcy McPherson. So, obviously for Gold Coast, out of favour, he's an able pressure forward. If he's that sort of, if it's a throwaway 4th round pick, I think he's a pretty reasonable piece. Where if you're looking for, I guess a bit like what Melbourne have had with it, the likes of a Alex Neil-Bullen, a James Harms, that sort of role player, where it's just there for that sort of pressure, that tackling. You don't need a high level guy for that sort of role. And I think for me, a McPherson really sort of fits that role. So for a club looking for that, and I just added him to the list now as you've seen, but look, I think he's another where, look, you've got viability there. I think you could take him pretty reasonably and do pretty well out of that, honestly. Then for some inside mids, so you've got Patrick Lipinski. So underused by the Dogs. He needs to go somewhere where he can be featured through the midfield, and I think Collingwood's the spot for him. So I think he'll have a really good season next year. So seeing what he was doing through the preseason, through the midfield, seeing what he's done in years past, for me, he's a genuine midfielder who can also push forward. So having been pushed to the outside, pushed forward, look, I really want to see him through the middle. I think that's his spot. So I think he's got the game to do that. Is that you could almost call him a mini Bont. He's not Bont quality, but he's sort of that sort of caliber of player. And it could be a bit like a Jack Crisp story where it's just, you're not going to be paying a lot to get him in the door. And he's just that sort of, he's not going to be a costly get, but he can really play. So, yeah, it's just a good opportunity to take someone where it's just, you've got a team with too many midfielders who haven't been able to utilise them all. And Lipinski for me is one of those there where I think there's value for other teams to really feature him and get a lot more out of him. And Luke Dunstan. So it's been a bit weird seeing St Kilda not use him. He's actually played good footy when he's played. So he's been that 10 contested possessions every game type. So he's got that contested side. His pressure's been really good. So for pressure acts, high-end stuff, I reported on that component as well in my piece on ESPN today. So yeah, Dunstan again, really good midfielder, underutilized, and put him on a Collingwood, put him on a team that just lacks those good midfielders, feature him, and he can be a really good piece. So, yeah, and again, you're not going to have to pay a lot for him, but he's a good footballer. So, yeah, I'd really like to see Dunstan go to that sort of scenario where he can be featured through the midfield because he's a good midfielder. And I think with that new opportunity and I guess a more featured role, I think, yeah, people are going to see that and recognise that. Riley West. So he's been ripping it up in the VFL for those who don't watch much VFL. But of course with the Dogs, you just can't get a look in the midfield. And when he's played at AFL level, he's been sort of relegated to playing forward, which isn't him at all. So, and look, he can go forward. He can provide pressure, kick some goals here and there, but he's a pure midfielder. So he really needs to go to a situation where he can be featured through the midfield. And with the Dogs, how's that going to happen? Their midfield's too good. He's not going to get a look in. So, yeah, look, someone should make a play for him this off-season. He's disgruntled. His dad's frustrated too, despite even being a great of the Dogs. But he's publicly obviously stated that he wasn't happy with how Riley's been used. So I think there's an opportunity for a team there to sweep him up and, yeah, obviously put him to better use. And the Dogs could use the picks. So I think there could be some opportunities there that haven't necessarily been, in the media spoken about to this point. And then Stephen Cornelio. So he's on that long-term deal on big money. So, of course, whoever's going to trade for him, you're going to ask GWS to pay a good amount of his money. But I don't think you're going to have to cough up a lot to get him because he's on that big money. He's in and out of the best 22. So GWS can't possibly value him based on that. And he's not being featured as one of the primary midfielders either. He's being forced forward more than he'd like. And look, you can put him across half forward a little bit, but he's a midfielder. That's where he plays his best footy. So again, if you've got a situation where maybe it's a Fremantle where they're losing an Adam Chera, well, you can put in a Cornelio and you're going to get good output there in his place and you're going to get more out of him. So I think there's opportunities there for a club to get a Cornelio personally. And look, as long as you're getting them to pay a good amount of the contract, because you don't want to be paying that $1 million a year or whatever is on. So, yeah, that's, I guess, the key point there. Then moving on, so you've got Sam Petreski's season, so underutilised and poorly utilised by Carlton for that matter. He doesn't look good across halfback. Put him through the midfield. He can rotate sort of across half forward. He can play a bit outside as needed as well. So, but he's a midfielder, so you need to put him through there. You need a team that can feature him, basically. So if you can do that, you're going to get better footy out of him, and he can return to playing that AFL standard football. So being pushed out of Carlton's best 22, you wouldn't expect him to cost much. So I do think there'll be a potential value opportunity there. David Zaharakis, I believe he might still have another year or two of capable footy in him. So I would explore him. I'd do a medical, see what's up, see how he's going. But of course, proven footballer. He's been good for a long time. So another case of where I wouldn't let age get in the way of someone who could potentially have another couple of years in him of good footy. And then outside mids, Brad Hill, he hasn't looked good for St Kilda. Obviously for Hawthorn, Fremantle, he's played good footy and that's why St Kilda coughed up so much. But I just don't like him on a small field. That's the thing that I imagine St Kilda fans would have noticed as well, watching him play. It just hasn't worked, but put him on the MCG, give him those wide expanses to play around on, and I think that's when he really causes problems and he can play good footy. So put him on a team, whether it's a Hawthorn, just any team who plays at the MCG, I think that's really the way to do it. So, and look, he's on that big money deal. I'd hope St Kilda would pay a fair bit of it to really want to absorb that contract. And look, if they're willing and if you don't have to cough up too much to get him, I think he's potentially a good get there. And then you've got Jared Pollock. So again, North Melbourne, they're not using him. So, and he's on a decent deal again. If you can get North Melbourne to pay a good portion of it, if he's not going to cost a lot, which you can't imagine he would. He's outside their best 22. So, yeah, I think there's a potential on the outside to get someone with a Pollock. He's got that hurt factor. He can do damage. It's a bit like an Aaron Hall situation last year where, look, he wasn't being used. He could have gone to another situation. And I think with a Pollock, you just need to do the same. And although Hall stayed and he got that role across halfback, which suits him to a T, by the way, I just think with a Pollock, you do need to put him in a different situation, and I think that'll really help him and rejuvenate his career, where I think he can still be a piece. He's still a capable footballer from what I've been watching. So, yeah, I wouldn't be giving up on Pollock just yet. I think he's got another few years of good footy in him still. But again, you don't want to pay much. It's just, if he's on the cheap, if you can get them to pay a bit of the contract, sure. So general defence, and I think there's a lot of options here, honestly, and a lot of opportunities if you're a bit thin in defence. So Connor McKenna. So on Twitter, he's flagged a potential return from Ireland to the AFL, asking if there's any teams looking for someone across halfback. So, and with a McKenna, I really like his game. So one of the best kicks, best runners out of defence, just in terms of that sheer offence off halfback. There's not really very many better. I'd really struggle to name anyone who can provide better rebound and drive off halfback. So having those sort of weapons, and look, he has obviously missed sort of the season having been in Ireland, but yeah, look, he's someone where I'd be very happy to get him. If I'm a Brisbane, if I'm any team needing that drive off halfback, I'm going and getting McKenna. He'd be my absolute top priority. Hayden Crozier, of course he missed out on selection in the grand final, and look, he's in that older age group, so given he may or may not be best 22 for the Dogs, we'll have to see how they're looking at things for next year. But given he got pushed out towards the end of the year, and even after his return to health, he wasn't able to get back in, I'd target Crozier and see if I can get him for a late pick. If I can, I think there's value there because for me, he's still AFL caliber for sure. Basher Hooley, look, he's probably retired by now, but again, he's one I'd be looking at. So if you can get him as a 1 to 2 year rent, look, he's a piece. He's still been playing good footy. He's still looked good this year to me. So yeah, again, it's just a case of clubs giving up on good veterans too early. So, and if you can have him as that sort of veteran leader, have him working with the younger players, helping them develop as well as playing at AFL level, I think you're getting a bargain there. So, and I'd be looking at the same for Hamish Hartlett. So, yeah, and look, he is dropping off. He's on his last leg, sure. But again, he's got those leadership qualities. I think there's still scope for him to play another year or two as well. So, yeah, it's just you do your medicals. You just see whether they're motivated, whether they want to join your club. And if they pass all that, then yeah, sure, get them. They're just free shots, so I don't see why not. If it's going to help your youth develop, I see that as far advantageous to taking, say, another kid late in the draft who probably doesn't make it and doesn't necessarily impact on the rest of the list and help them improve. Whereas one of these guys where they're proven players, proven leaders, they can really help with the growth of other players. Even if they're playing in front of them, I'd consider that perfectly okay. So Jordan Clark, underutilised by Geelong this year, and I found that really disappointing given Geelong have really lacked that drive and rebound from defence. I thought there was a real opportunity there, given they're that sort of slower moving team. But yeah, I think with a Clark, look, put him in another situation, give him a more prominent role, feature him, and I think he's an AFL piece. So, and then Aaron Francis. So he's been in and out of Essendon's best 22. They switch him back, they switch him forward. They don't know what to do with him. So if you're, say, one of the South Australian teams, there's an opportunity, and I'd use him in defence. I think that's his best spot. Just use him as that, I guess, rebounding, intercepting, third tallish defender. He's got some capabilities. So, yeah, I do think there's an opportunity there to at least have a role player, is my thinking. So, again, if all it takes is a late pick, I'd do it. If you have to pay more, forget it. Not interested. And then Marty Gleeson. So, delisted last year. I think he's still got game. So, a lot of people were really down on Gleeson. He intercepts really well, good ball user. He's really good one-on-one. So, again, for me, he's a role player. So, if he gets delisted again, or if it's just you don't have to trade anything for him, if it's just a late nothing pick you wouldn't be using, I would take Gleeson. He'd be someone I'd be very happy to introduce to my list. Thanks for watching, guys. And if you enjoyed this video and hearing some of my thoughts about some of the best trade and free agency targets, in the description below, I've included a link to my trade and free agency piece that I've got on ESPN today. So yeah, do make sure you check that out as well, because it's a good read. And frankly, it's probably my favorite piece for the year. Just always looking at, I guess, what are the opportunities for all the 18 clubs? Where are their positions of need, and who are some of the possible solutions in each of those spots as well, and how they should really be approaching their list management. So that's always a fun one for me. But anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Were there any potential Moneyball picks out there that I missed, or any sort of underutilized types? Yeah, that'd be interesting to hear. And if there's any that were on my list that you'd be saying, no, cross them off, they're no good, they're not going to have an AFL career, let me know as well with those guys. But anyway, thanks guys, and see you in the next video.